So first off, what I'm going to do is just cover what the prerequisites are for progressing to the first block course. So these are the current conditions that we're working with in version 3. Just so we're all clear, and if you've got any questions about that, feel free to unmute and we will discuss them. So can everyone see this document? Should have the heading ICE Industry Connection for Excellence, PD and PGD Level 4 version 3 prerequisites. I get a thumbs up from somebody.
Yep, can see it.
Cool, thank you. So the initial process is that you gain employment with a certified plumber or plumbing business. In some cases, that will be through ATT or Masterlink, and they will be the host company that you're employed by, and then you will go and work for a plumbing business, kind of like a subcontractor. Either one is great. Happy to have you on board. So the first step once you're enrolled and signed up with ICE is that we will book you onto a first aid and confined space course, and you need to have completed that first aid course and online sessions 1, 2, and 3. That's the training module, and I'll jump to that in a second, to get onto the first block course. So just so we're clear, I'm just going to shift over to Skills Bank. And what I'm talking about is those online sessions 1, 2, 3 is the first 5 training modules. Okay, so it's this bit here. You have to do the pre-assessment declaration first. And hopefully you've all been into at least one of these and worked your way through it. So this is what we call the training module, or the training package. And you have to work right through to the end of the module. So you'll see here, some of it is, until you go through it, is kind of semi-restricted, if you like. So you work through this first section, step by step, reading through it, maybe clicking on links and what have you. Wasn't the best idea, but it's interactive. That's one advantage of being online, so it can take you straight to alternative or appropriate website. Go back to it. So you work your way through that, reading through it at your own pace and your own time. You can start it, come back to it later. You don't have to do it all in one evening. So work your way through that. And when you get to the end of it, it's semi-interactive. Quite a lot to remember in that table. You can go back to it later on as well. So you can use this sort of contents bar on the side to jump back and review things. It's another slightly interactive ways of doing things. So you're working through that, and that's to kind of build your general knowledge on the topic. Then you got to get one of these knowledge checks. So they are just a practice questionnaire to kind of see, did you get the gist of what you've just covered in that first section? Sometimes they have been a little bit more difficult than intended. So they're intended really as a self-check to see how you're going. I know in some cases there's up to 8 questions, and the feedback built in is not super good. So you just get an overall percentage, and then you have to do it again from scratch without being 100% sure which question you got wrong, which is a bit of a pain. I am working on a technical fix for that with our support, our instructional designers. So hopefully that will be rolled out within a week or 2, and that should smooth out this process quite a bit. So you work through that. case you've got to type them in, which is a little unusual. Out off the top of your head. Take a guess. There you go. That was lucky because I guessed the last one. I wasn't 100% sure. And then you pass it. So you'll do that again. I don't really want to take that again. And then work through the next section. So what you have to do is work through this whole assessment to the end, and then you will unlock the actual unit standard assessment. So initially, when you go in and log in and go into the skills bank for the first time, first you'll have to do your pre-assessment declaration. So you only have to do that once. Tick 4 boxes there. I don't have them because I've got different access. And then go back into your course. Year 1, sessions 1 to 3 are the first ones. Do that learning module, and then you'll find that this assessment pops up. It's probably ghosted out before, so you might see it, but you can't actually open it. Once you work through this, you will have access to it and you can open it. You can then do this assessment, which is the actual unit standard assessment, which is great. But the prerequisite that we were talking about before is just that training module. So it's the training module for the first 5 to get on to block 1. So if we go back to the main page, so I'm jumping around a fair bit here. So you have to have done your first aid training, and then you have to do the training modules for gas contaminated environments, asbestos, ethics, regulatory framework, excavation and trenching. Then you can be enrolled in block 1. To be enrolled in block 2, go to the sessions 4, 5, 6, and you have to do the pre-training module, the less frequently used material, water supply, hot water supply systems, sanitary appliances and fixtures. If you've done that, you're eligible for block 2. Basically what it's telling us there. Block 1 is drawing and pattern making. So you'll do that on a block course. It's a 3-day course, and the tutors will take you through the drawing process for the different drawing techniques, parallel line, triangulation, that sort of thing. And then you're likely to make up some of the patterns in sheet metal. That's what we're doing. Block 2 is a bit of a mixture of water pipe work, sort of basic intro to sanitary plumbing, and basic line level gradient sort of excavation stuff. So a bit of a mixture. Do a little bit of the drainage pit and a little bit using our pods, which are basically bathroom modules you can see behind me. Do all that to get into year 2, which some people in version 3 are just starting year 2 this year. You have to have completed all 9 online theory unit standards for year 1. You have to complete all the practical unit standards for the 2 block courses, and you have to have completed all the year 1 on jobs, which is all these ones here. It's going to be quite small, which is part of your initial induction sign-up pack. And they are also available as on-job downloads in Skills Bank. So year 1 odd jobs, you've got to have finished all those, submitted them, have them passed, reported to NZQA. The process with those is that you completed it, you send it to your account manager, or they take it off you, either way, and then it goes through our internal process to an assessor. If there's some additional information that's required, they will send it back to you with markups on it as a PDF, and that will come back via your account manager. So they're the link in the chain between you and the assessor. Any questions on all of that up till now? No, I've got a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll just respond to those. We've got one. I've run out of attempts. I've had 3 attempts, and I'm now locked out of the assessment. So the process there is that you contact your account manager, and they will contact one of the tutors, or possibly me, depending on who's available, and we will unlock additional attempts. Chingbo, if you type in which assessment you're currently locked out of, I can unlock it tonight for you as well. So if you want to add that into the chat, happy to do it. Got another question to Marker. How much notice do we get for a block course? You should get 6 weeks notice to you and your employer. Our main means of communication will be via email. But you may also get a reminder text. We are set up to send e-texts as well. If you're not sure, your first port of call should always be your account manager. They are your direct contact with us. They can also advise whether you've met the prerequisites for a block course as well, if there is one coming up. Sometimes they will say, there's a course on this date, you need to do X, Y, Z online modules, and then you can go on the course. Okay, I've got a couple of people with specific ones that I will unlock for them. All right, I will do that during this evening. What I want to do now is just to provide you with a little bit of additional informational resources that you may or may not be aware of. So there's a couple of, obviously we are working toward, you guys are working towards becoming qualified as a plumber drain layer or a plumber gas fitter drain layer, depending on your current employment. And we're working in a regulated industry, which is managed by the Plumbers, Gas Fitters and Drain Layers Board. So I'm just going to go to their website. It's got quite a lot of useful information. So one, we have to be currently licensed, and that has to renew every year. So it's very important that you need to have a current license. That is actually one of the prerequisites to getting onto a block course. If you're not currently licensed, you may not be eligible to attend the course, or you won't be. There's a trade login section. There's past exam info. There's a technical library. There's guidelines. There's links to building documents and standards. So there's quite a lot of information there. There's also information for the consumer. So if they've had a plumber do some work, they're not happy with the result of that, they felt it was unsafe, unprofessional, something like that, there's guidelines for them on how they may make a formal complaint, or what the role of the board is. So for you guys, probably the main key areas are their technical library, where they've got some additional theory resources, effectively, or tech sheets on how to do things, which might be of use. There's guidelines around supervision, and what that should look like, or what's required to look like to be compliant. There's access to past continual professional development resources that they've run for licensed people, which they have to go through or sit through or attend to relicense each year, and links to building code documents. Now they also have access to the standards website, which aren't freely available otherwise. So that is probably a key one, because at times, gas fitting, you're going to have to access standards to do the assessments or to even work compliantly. So gaining access to those is fairly critical, and paper copies run a couple of $100 per standard, and there's hundreds of standards out there. There's a few key ones for plumbing. So I'll see if I can find those. So I've just gone from the trade tab to building standards, and I'm going to access Standards New Zealand. That was kind of weird. Links seem to be a bit strange. Sure why that was a bit of a dud link. I think you may have to use your trade login. I think there's 2 links, but that one didn't seem to be particularly successful. So oops. Can't remember my password. So I believe that link there didn't work directly. So I think you have to do the trade login. So you may need to set that up effectively if you're not familiar or you haven't done it before. But you will all be, because you're all currently licensed, you all have a trade login, whether you know it or not. If you are unable to do it by just going in there and doing it and don't know what your password is, you may need to ring the board during business hours to get that access sorted out. But it is pretty important, because that's going to be likely your only access to Standards New Zealand and the standards library that you will need. So make that a priority. So once you follow the link from the board's website, you can search standards within their paid subscription. And for example, if you're doing gas, 5601 part 1 is a pretty key one. See, let's pop it up there. So once you've found the document you're looking for, you can view the PDF. Download it. And there you go. You've got your electronic copy of that standard now sitting there on your device. Now, there are copyright restrictions on it, so there are some things to consider there, but you have access to it through that link, no problem. It will let you download it as a PDF, so you could download it to your phone. Just read their guidelines around copyright. Obviously, you won't be allowed to share it around to other people legally, but it's there and available for your own use. So another key one for plumbers and drain layers is so ASNZS 3500 Part 2, which has got all your sanitary plumbing, all your drain laying. Oops, that was just the amendment. You got to watch that. Sometimes you don't get quite what you think you were getting. So I mistakenly got Amendment 1 there, not the whole document. So you'll find that sometimes when you're looking for these documents and the building code documents. So here we go, got it right that time. So that's the current version. And then we've got the whole document there for your reference. So You might want to make yourself a little library of these documents. Save them onto your device, and then they're there for the duration of your study, and probably every year delete it, go back to the board's website, jump onto Standards New Zealand and download the most up-to-date copy. Next place I'm going to take you to, we can actually get there through the board's website as well. We've got a link to it, or you can just Google it. It's pretty easy to find. Under the technical library there. So we're going to look at building compliance documents. So you've probably heard of G12, G13, some common main plumbing ones. So the G codes tend to be the main protocol, but other ones are also relevant. So that will take you to the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment website. They call it the Building Performance section, which covers all the building code and approved building code documents. So like I said, the main ones that you're likely to want, the G codes, maybe E for roofing. So you'll see as you're working through the online stuff or even the practical stuff, they will reference certain documents, which are these building code clauses, and you may well need to look them up. So for example, there's G12. Now just scroll your way down the page, look for the current version. Occasionally, if you open it up and it's just an amendment, go back, should be a full document. And you want the most up-to-date one. Typically, it's in this position on the page. And there we go. New Zealand Building Code G12. Amendment 12, so it's the most up-to-date one. Shows what all the amendments are. Objective, safeguard people from illness, etc., etc. Then it gets into the specifics of basically what you have to do to comply with the New Zealand Building Code. So within this document, it's got what's called acceptable solutions and verification methods. So see, AS1 stands for acceptable solution 1, and VM stands for verification method. It's typically a test method or way of proving something. So for this one, it's got all, water supply, backflow, hot water cylinders, all the information around that and what you have to do to comply. So it's got little diagrams, etc. So when you're doing the hot water assessments, that's your go-to place. So I'm going to jump out of there. Another key place, let's go back, is WorkSafe. So several of the assessments reference WorkSafe codes of practice, which is basically best practice guidelines for a specific industry or industry group. For example, the code of practice for working at heights, or the code of practice for excavations, two that fall under the plumbing koawan and are referenced in some of the assessments. See if I can find one. There we are. So that's typed in excavation, and that's the excavation safety code of practice. Clearly labelled, but what it is. May even have a hard copy in your sign-up pack. I'm not sure. So for the excavation assessment, which is the 5th one in the first lot of sessions for year 1, that is a key document. So if I scroll through that and we look at something specific, so you actually probably find that as you go through it, review it, you can use the index to find something. Some of these diagrams may be familiar to the training modules and or the assessment. So here's a key one. If you're doing an excavation, you've got what's called the you've got what's called the safe slope, or the zone of influence, so which is basically a 45-degree angle, and any imposed load should be kept a meter back from that. So even if this was a square trench with some sort of trench protection, or it's a shallow trench, didn't need trench protection, you would still need to keep all your load, vehicles, etc. at a 45-degree angle back from the base plus a meter. So around trench protection, those types, what that looks like. So that's what I was talking about there, the zone of influence. So that's, that's a type of specific question that's likely to come up within the assessments, and this is where you're going to find that information. Another one that comes up is we call particularly hazardous work, or used to be called notifiable work. So it's work that you have to pre-notify WorkSafe before you go and do it. So it's not after an accident. That you still have to notify WorkSafe if there's been a serious incident, if someone's died or seriously injured, but that's not what they're talking about when they're talking about pre-notification. So there's specific work that's been identified as particularly hazardous, and you need to go onto WorkSafe's website to find out what that is. So obviously, if we're doing it in relation to plumbing, gas fitting, drain laying, we want to select types of work from that list that's relevant to our industry. We don't really want to talk about probably working with explosives if we're not actually going to be working with them. We want to select some that are relevant. So there is an online form. You can open it without submitting it, and it will actually give you the list of these particular hazardous work. So, for example, if you're looking in there, there's a risk of falling 5 meters or more. Well, that is one example of particular hazardous work that could well apply to the plumbing industry. Lifting, so if you're drain laying, you're lifting precast concrete structures, they could well be over 500 kg, and you may be using an excavator to do so. And here's a key one that we should all be aware of. So any work in a pit, shaft, trench, or other excavation in which a person is required to work in a space more than 1.5 meters deep, having a depth greater than the horizontal width at the top. So basically, it's deeper than it is wide. It's a trench, and it's deeper than 1.5 meters. Before you begin work, WorkSafe have to be notified. So that's really a drain laying specific one there. So you need to be aware of those. Have a look at the form. Now, you may not personally, as the first-year apprentice, be filling in the form, but you need to be aware to pass the assessment and to complete your qualification that these things exist. and what the actual requirements are when that needs to take place. Also, a part of WorkSafe, it's probably a little bit of a stretch from where most of you guys are at currently, but there is energy safety. So they are effectively a subsidiary of WorkSafe, and they cover electrical and gas, for us, important, gas certification, and also they have the appliance database, so approved appliances that can be sold and installed in New Zealand that importers or manufacturers have to get their appliances approved and listed on that database. High risk gas fitting certificates also go in a database that's managed and monitored by Energy Safety, and they do the auditing of gas fitters. So we need to be aware that they exist. And from their section of the WorkSafe website, there's obviously links to the things I've mentioned and other useful information for gas fitters. Any questions on any of that I've covered so far? Oops, got some new messages. A couple of people locked out. Okay, I've got a specific question. That. I've got a specific question here, so we might have a look at that. 36 to 692. This is an on job rather than an online theory, but that's okay. We can look at those as well. Now, this one is written in an electrical context, but it's actually a maths assessment. So the fact that it's using electrical terminology, don't let that throw you off. It's actually not really an issue. It's just a matter of doing some basic maths. So the way these triangles work, what sort of tells you that there is, example in this one, volts divided by resistance will give you current, or current times resistance will give you voltage. Voltage divided by current will give you resistance. So it's the same as the gradient length for gradient as a ratio triangle that we use in drain laying. So same math principle. Which question wasn't it? 6B. Funny one. So I've got a trainee who had an issue with this question. Let's see. Asked to calculate in square millimeters for a circuit board. What's the area of this board in millimeters square? So length times width. Okay, don't know if you've got a different question there, Dylan, but based on that, I'm getting a different answer than what you've put down. So I'll just respond to you in the chat now. Dylan, do you know what the dimensions were? You've got a 120 by 120, did you say? 120. Yeah, no, you've got your answers wrong, Dylan. Yeah, Dylan, I'm not supposed to really give away specific answers, but there we are. Some of the maths ones are a little problematic. There is one I covered in the last session, which I think I'll cover again. So what I thought I'd do is I'd just walk us through some of the problem assessment questions in each assessment. So most of them are reasonable and achievable, but there are a few problem ones. So I'm just going to do that now, unless someone pops up with something else. So this is the gas contaminated environment assessment. So the ones you're looking for here are basically going to be ones that are discussed in the training material. So common is a very vague term, but they're ones that are relating to the plumbing, gas, drain laying industry. So ground gases, fuel gases, not necessarily something they're going to use at a hospital. Yep. Dylan, yeah, look in the chat comments. You've maybe pushed the wrong button twice or something. The answer is already squared by multiplying. So if you go length times width, that gives you a square answer. You don't need to square the answer again. It's already squared because you've times the two together. Likewise, if you're doing volume, length times width times height, that is an answer in whatever units you're using as volume. Some of these questions are a bit funny. So, you know, basically what you'd be looking for is what is the most likely, eliminate any ones that are complete write-offs that don't make any sense, and work your way through it. Review back to the training material if possible. If you've got two screens, or even you can open another screen on your phone, look at the training material or study guides while you're doing the assessment. It'll just make it a lot easier rather than necessarily have to memorize it all. You can have two tabs open, go back to the other part, come back to the question. Yep, I think that's pretty much it. Again, these things are quite specific. When it's a fact, like, you know, the ignition temperature of a gas, well, Google is going to be just as good as any other source of information, provided you cross-check at least a couple of sites or something. If they're both the same, it's highly likely that the ignition temperature of methane is whatever it says on Wikipedia or whatever else it is. Also highly likely that 95% of this material is in the training material provided to you. So probably at least 80% of all assessment questions are covered in the training blocks or the study guides that are provided to you. So they should really be your first port of call if you're unsure. Seeing any drastically problematic ones yet. If anyone sees a question or knows a question that they thought was unreasonable or not correct, yell out. We'll stop and discuss it.
Could I ask a question?
Yep, far away.
Could you please go back to that question I asked about 30692 question 6b?
Yep. So 30. So I looked it up. The current version has got 80 mil by 80 mil, but obviously your assessment was. I
It's
see.
100. 120
meters.
meters by
Oh,
120
sorry.
millimeters.
Right, that's really weird. So you'd have to convert that meters to millimeters.
Yeah, which is 120,000 millimeters.
Yeah, right, okay. Times 120, that's a really strange.
14,400,000.
Yeah, I do wonder if that's actually, they've put a typo in there.
Oh,
I'll look into it. It's not the current assessment, so it's obviously been rewritten, possibly because there was an error in it. So I think if that's the only question, if we get Susan to send it to us, so we might need to get someone to mute themselves because we get a lot of singing in the background. Not sure if that's you, Dylan, or someone else. But yeah, we can look into that one specifically, and we can chat with Ben, and I'll get Ben to assess it, who's our full-time person in that on-job space, and we'll get that sorted. So he's aware of pretty much all the curly questions, or where there's an issue with the study guide not necessarily matching up with the question.
Yeah, bro, I got that one wrong as well. It's like 120 meters by 120 millimeters or something.
Yeah, okay.
Which is a massive base plate.
Yeah, this doesn't logically make sense, or you wouldn't estimate that would have anything to do with it. So do you want to just chuck your name in the chat as well, and then I can follow up with both of you? Could we just put the full names as well, so first name, surname, because then I can find you in our system, because if there's two people with the same name, I'll be looking all week. And then I can follow up, potentially email it to me as well, the actual assessment. I'll have a look at it. I'll stick my email in there. There you go. So if you want to either just put your names in the chat around that specific on-job assessment, or take down my email and then email me the assessment that you're having the issues with that's been sent back to you, then we can look at it and resolve it. Because if you've taken what's written as the correct dimension and then they've marked it against something else, then we need to just pass it and move on. I think this one is actually pretty reasonable. I'm not that familiar with it because it's a self-marking assessment, so basically it marks itself. So unless anyone's got any obvious issues there, what can happen is with these ones is there's actually a bank of questions. So the questions we're seeing aren't necessarily all the questions that exist. So we might go through and think, oh, these questions are sweet, and then you might get one that's slightly more oddball and the wording's a bit more confusing. But like I said, if you are locked out, you've had 3 attempts, get in touch with your account manager and they can fairly quickly activate some more attempts or have them activated. One change we have done is where you've got to select multiple answers, we've actually told you how many answers you now need. So before it would just say choose all the ones that applied, or whatever, and that meant that you might have got 4 correct ones, but you were missing one. So you got it wrong, but you didn't get it wrong. Now you'll know that you need to select 5. So that's one minor fix we've made to it, the system. Jumping in there. Let's look at the asbestos one. Question 2 is problematic. Question 1's okay. So question 1's pretty straightforward. There's this term friable or non-friable. So one means that it's intact and stable, and the other one means it will easily turn to dust as soon as you come in contact with it, which makes it more dangerous, more likely to get into your lungs. Question 2 is saying what type, which is really the wrong word. It should say what condition of asbestos is used in blocks and shingles, because there are different types of naturally occurring asbestos, like blue asbestos, brown asbestos, white asbestos. That's not what the model answer says. So the model answer is basically you're going to have to select between either friable or non-friable. If I say any more, I've given it away. But if you're looking at a sheet, like a roof sheet of asbestos, as long as you're not going anywhere near it, is it going to be friable or non-friable? So some of you may have had some feedback when you've answered that, because you've put white, brown, whatever, and then the marker, which could have been me recently, has come back and said you need to select friable or non-friable, and then boom, you select the white one and off you go. But if you haven't done that question yet, heads up, note that down. It's got to be one of those two things. These ones are fairly okay, most people. Just products, doesn't really matter, there's a big selection. If you go to, again, WorkSafe's website, they've got a whole shitload of resources on asbestos. And for a couple of the slightly more technical questions, looking those up is fairly quite critical. So they've got a quick guide for tradespeople, which is useful for most of the questions. And they've got specific ones for different trades as well. So there is one for plumbers, which will give you most of what you need to know. And that might be worth looking out for. So it's all places that a plumber is likely to come in contact with it. And then the sort of general safety guff around the risks of asbestos. So there's a big, massive list there of a whole heap of different asbestos products. No shortage of them. And it's used extensively in buildings pre-1980. So, you know, it's most buildings in existence. So it's all over the place. Gives you some information there. Now, this is fairly critical, the type of mask. So the bare minimum is a P2 mask. But, you know, depending on the volume and the type of asbestos, you may need to be a licensed removal person, or you'd want to have the best fitting, highest grade mask you can get hold of, suitable for asbestos dust. It's no good getting a great mask for welding fumes if it's not going to protect you from asbestos dust. So you need one that's suitable for the type of hazard you're exposed to. Info on getting waste. So most of what you'll need is actually going to be in there. This is one that trips people up, asbestos related work. So there's a specific definition in the code of practice for what asbestos related work is. So you really need to look that up, because often that's answered incorrectly. So if I just go back a step from here, there is the big meaty full code of practice, which is a pretty big document. But once you've got it, you should be able to search it, and let's see if it works. Zero. Oh, that was fun. I spelled it wrong. Like that. Let's try it. There we go. Hopefully we've got something there. So if you search, it's going to be 140 times that comes up. That's probably not super useful, but perseverance, you may well be able to find out what that actually means. So there is a difference between asbestos-related work and asbestos removal work. It's probably a key start point. You can go and do exactly what I've done and look up related work and find out exactly what that means. So you've got a definition and you can stick it into your assessment answer right here. These other ones are, people typically get those right. So unlicensed removal, you can only remove so much, and it has to be a certain condition. And then licensed removal person can do basically whatever they like. Health impacts, those guidelines are going to give you that. What's a safe amount? Which type is considered the most dangerous? So in this case, type means type. So it's going to be white, blue, brown asbestos is what they're talking about. An odd one thing about smoking. This one here references that standard. They should hopefully be able to get that standard through the PGDB website. To be fair, you don't really need it. You could just read that guide for plumbers, and it's going to give you enough information in there to answer that question. So really, it's just asking about what type of protection is required. So, you know, if you're covering some of these things here, that's actually going to answer the question adequately. But you could reference that standard in there. It's usually answered fairly well. Again, that's fairly straightforward. This is a slightly problematic question. Again, you need to find out what these things are from those asbestos guidelines and all the training material, and then complete the sentence. So, for example, a dirty decontamination area could be an area where asbestos contaminated clothing and equipment is located until you can put it in a bag and get rid of it, something along those lines. Whatever is appropriate. It's a bit of a funny. I don't really like a question like that because it's a bit wishy-washy. But you have to finish off those sentences with a reasonable response. There is obviously a model answer it's kind of judged against. I'm not 100% sure if it's got those things as a list in one of these documents. I don't think it is. Maybe it's in the training material. I'm not 100% sure, but it's relatively achievable using a little bit of common sense. Any questions on the asbestos assessment? Right, we're going well. Only 3 to go and 4 minutes to do it. This one sometimes throws people off a little bit, not necessarily this specific question, but these types of question. Basically, if you're not sure, what I suggest you do is you Google the act or the document that is listed. If you can't pick between two, is an obvious choice. And if you looked up, for example, if I go and look something up, the Building Act. I'm going to find the whole act as a document, and where I'll find a website that kind of gives me a summary of what the act's about. So in this case, rather than the act, I've got a website, and it's given me an overview of what it's about. the description in this type of question is going to be fairly broad and general, and it should be broadly similar to any government-related documents or website info for the general public on what that's all about. Likewise, if you wanted to look at a specific act, there is a government legislation website, and you can actually see the whole act in sections. Got interactive contents. You can jump to specific sections. So as you get more technical on the later courses, some of the gas stuff, gas safety measurement regulations as well, you need to go to a higher level of depth into these documents. But for these initial ones, really, you just need a brief summary telling you what the overarching purpose of the act or regulations or whatever it happens to be are about. Some of these privacy ones can be interpreted a couple of different ways, but basically, use your common sense. If it could be interpreted as theft or a breach of their privacy, then you're not going to do it. If it's directly related to your work and what you need to do in your normal work process, then yeah, by all means do it, because that's what you need to do to get the job done and or be compliant. Oops. Again, some of these ones are a bit situational, if you like. But if you did leave a big mess, there's a potential risk that they injure themselves on it, which you don't want. Again, loosely, these are going to relate to the Consumer Guarantees Act and those requirements. But again, it's kind of like what's fair and reasonable. It's probably equally as much there. In not every case, it's going to be you're liable if someone's tampered with the hot water system or something. But what could you do for them in that situation? Any sort of reasonable answer should get a mark. Now, this one here, they give you this sort of ad that's potentially misleading, and they're asking which piece of legislation. So the legislation is an act. Quite often people confuse two similar acts and put the wrong one. So one is the Consumer Guarantees Act and the other is the Fair Trading Act. They are broadly on the surface similar, but they're actually specifically different. So Consumer Guarantees Act is about a product or a service that's been provided and a minimum warranty that's going to kind of apply there. It needs to be fit for purpose, that sort of thing. The Fair Trading Act is about misleading advertising, or false representation of a goods or service. So there's a specific difference there. These are all sort of follow-on questions around one of those two acts, and then appropriate response based on those. Again, just it's more of a common sense question, I guess. Too much of a problem for people. These ones here, I mean, are specific to your situation, so it's very hard to mark these questions wrong. But as long as you've put a reasonable response, I mean, if you just say do whatever you like, whether you do or not, that's probably not going to get the mark. So just put, think of your audience, the assessor in this case, and what's deemed to be industry acceptable for whichever 5 you select. Same applies to this question. I'm conscious of time, so I might save the regulatory framework and excavating one till next time. There is one specific one in the excavating one that I want to just very quickly touch on before we wrap up. It's question 10. Not question 10. What question is it? 12. These bloody questions. now. It's 8. Oh, this might be a revised version of it. Oh, sorry. Oh, maybe we fixed it. Okay. If you got the older version, depends maybe when you signed up, which one you first had access to. But this question is problematic for people, and that's because it's poorly written. Part 2. First part's fine. What is the volume of that shape? And it actually gives you the formula that will allow you to work it out. So you've got 2 different heights at each end. Doesn't look much like a normal trench, but it's just a volume calculation with 2 different sides. So that's fine. If you follow that formula, first you've got to work out the average height by using that part of it, and then you just make the average height the height for that part of the formula, and that'll give you the answer to part 1. For part 2, it's asking for the amount of base material over 100 mil pipe. Now that's very misleading. What you need to do is use 200 millimeters for the height. That's it. Then just bang in your width and length dimensions here and here, and you get your answer. That's all it's looking for. It's a weird one because normally if you're doing bedding or whatever, it would go below the pipe as well, so it doesn't really line up with industry practice. But that's how it's been written. So you may have had feedback on that question if you've submitted it once, because it's effectively impossible to get the model answer for around 99% of us on the first attempt. It's one that I'd like to rewrite, but it appears that it's actually been rewritten as a new assessment anyway. That's all multi-choice, so that's probably the only people that started before a certain date that are going to have access to it. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Any other questions before we wrap it up? I will post this, go and unlock those assessments people are locked out of that you've put in the chat. Cool, thanks for the thank yous. We're going to have another session in a month's time, so hope to see you there. And if you've got any questions, you can save them up till then, and or go through your account manager if you're kind of stuck. I'll jump on these ones now.